So for those of you who've been here before, you kind of know what the drill is. I try to talk about the landscapes we're facing for the following year, the coming year, and then both in the terms of the economy and in terms of technology, and then I'll do 10 predictions which I'll have to live with for the year after that. And those it's totally fair game to bring them back next year and say you got this totally wrong. So I want to start with the economy. And I hope these ideas are, if not new to you, at least useful and maybe a little fresh. You've all read this stuff. You read the FT. Most of the world is going to be flat next year. Done. It's just going to happen. Most of the world will be flat next year, flat to down. And the U.S. is going to be up. Very interesting. I wish people actually had the wisdom behind all this stuff to understand why that's true. So, you hear a lot about why, but not anything that I found very useful. I'd like to propose, and for those of you who read S&S, this will make sense to you, I hope. But I've been writing for a few years about what I call the S&S Big Shift. And my apologies to Deloitte, because Eric Openshaw and John Hagel, these guys who invented the Big Shift from Deloitte, full credit. I've already apologized to Eric once on this. I should rename this, but I've been too lazy. But the idea of the S&S Big Shift is pretty simple. There are national business models. I checked my 10, as I do every year, I checked my 10 predictions with Bill Janeway yesterday and the Warburg Pincus team. If you want to have the tough run, you go to Warburg Pincus about 4 in the afternoon, you read them your stuff, and then they go like, if they're quiet, you're in trouble. So we had a really good time. Bill loves the 10 predictions, which we're going to come to. But the first thing we came to was this thing. Bill is probably one of the world's great economists, and he's diving back into the world of theoretical economics. He's at Cambridge. He's an amazing guy. If you don't know him, you should meet him. And so I said, Bill, I'm very frustrated. It's kind of driving me crazy. Why is it that people can look at companies and automatically understand the power of business models on a company level, but they never look at countries the same way? It's insane. I mean, everyone knows that, Google has this business model and Microsoft has, but when you look at Italy, or if you look at America, or if you look at China or South Korea, they always just talk about the GDP or, some part of the elephant, but not the whole elephant. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy because just like countries, you can't understand how countries behave if you don't accept that, first of all, they, like companies, have a business model, and those models will literally dictate what they do. So, we kind of shared frustrations. I think what we're seeing as the S&S Big Shift plays out now, we're kind of in year 2 or 3 of this story. We have a part of the world which uses a different business model, which includes copying, stealing, and so forth of IP, and the result of that is a change in the global weather. The global economic weather, whether you're concerned about jobs or GDP or whatever. And so if you understand that, it's a very clear shift going on. And we actually see the second generation now of that shift. So we already saw things where the copiers were going after the creators. So I'll give you one example, Alibaba. Alibaba lived in a protected environment, no competition. If you're not Chinese, you're not allowed to play. And they were able to take business models from eBay, Amazon, Make a List, everything in the West, have it happen in a protected garden, come out, and then raise money in New York. Fine. And now they're going to go after Amazon. You probably have all received your 11 main advertisements this Christmas to buy stuff that looks a little bit like an Amazon ad. But now we're kind of in the next step where we've had Samsung, and the other example was Samsung going after Apple. Now we have the second-gen copiers going after the first-gen copiers. And so if you're from South Korea, we have Huawei and Xiaomi going after Samsung. And if you follow this stuff, Samsung's not having a good time. Samsung's taking a real hit on this. And so here's a copier, which is a smart copier, an aggressive copier, but they are a copier. They went after, they made Apple phones. And now, guess what? It's not that hard to play this game. All you need is money. So China comes and said, we'd like to have part of that market. Actually, we'd like to have more of that market. And they're going to take a huge market share from Samsung. Are they taking it from Apple? Not so much. They're really going to take it, I think, from Samsung. And so if you're watching the global economy, you're trying to figure out who's going to win and lose next year, you're going to see the perils of Pauline when, if you're choosing this particular business model, here's the upside is you get a very quick up. You copy Apple, you get rich at no cost. The downside is the guy behind you can do that too. And when that happens, then you take the hit. The innovator doesn't take the hit. And so I think Apple will be fine, but Samsung will not be fine. And that's a really interesting situation. If we come back a year from now and talk to us about phones and about pads, Samsung's going to be in a world of hurt, I think. And we're going to be talking about ZTE, Xiaomi, Huawei, and a bunch of other guys, many of whose names you've never even heard of before, who will have had protection in the Chinese market and come forward and win. So that's the world. And when you look at how are we making money and who's going to make the money, in my perspective, that's the view you've got to have. If you see that national business model story, it's very easy to see winners and losers and why. I'm tempted to say, I think from the FT perspective, you want to say, what's wrong with the world economy today? You're almost tempted to say, why aren't we all getting rich? There's so much potential. There's so much, it's just like our conversation just now. There's so much to do. There's so much money to be made. There's so many opportunities. Why aren't we all getting rich? And I'd like to share with you an idea which I think is a true idea. Is the global economy a zero-sum game? Winner take all? Big question. You probably all have your own points of view on this. My perspective is, the answer is no, when everyone is creating new products and services. When everyone is creating new products and services, the pie gets bigger and bigger. Yes, when half the global GDP gains are based on copying or theft. So we get a choice in this game as a globe. You have a choice. Do you want the pie to get bigger, or do you just want to have a zero-sum game and take the other guy's stuff? And in fact, I think the risk is actually much greater than what I just described. The global pie will shrink if theft becomes the winning strategy. It won't just be static, it'll actually go down. As innovators lose the returns they need to stay in business. And this isn't theoretical. We've already seen major innovative companies go away. So when we lose these major global companies, what are we losing? We're not just losing those jobs, those dollars. We're actually seeing a situation where the company that won isn't as inventive. And the cost to the global economy of that change is a negative cost. It's a really important situation. So the global economy isn't going to expand. The pie isn't going to get bigger when that happens. It's going to get smaller. Okay, enough of that. So now let's go through very quickly go through some economic points. I'm really proud that in July or whatever it was, when I said you'll never see this oil price again, it turned out I was right. And it's still short-term thinking, but I think I was right. So back when it was way up wherever it was, remember the days of peak oil? 3 years ago? Peak oil, right? Peak oil. God, that was stupid. So the idea that we're done with oil prices at $148 forever is a really great thing. And I think that that's a true idea. I don't think we're ever coming back. And what's actually happened is, and you see this out of OPEC, we've lost oil price control. We've lost the ability to price. So I saw this morning, the Saudis came out, they're damage control out of Saudi Arabia. They're saying this morning it's going to be 60. Floor is at 60. It's a kind of a joke, They're trying to stop the sled from going down the snow slope. And they're hoping that 60 might be where they can put a stop to it. But certainly, in a matter of weeks or months, we've seen a change that's about 50% price drop. And I don't see any return to that. All of you read about this, but when you think about it, it is a global event. It's hard to, if you look at the history of modern civilization, the history of the economy since 1945, it's hard to make the argument that energy isn't the most important factor. Wars have been fought, countries have come and go, everything seems to pretty much key off of what you might call a global tax. So literally, when you make something and you need energy to make it, you're paying a tax depending upon what that price is. If the price is 150, your tax is way over here. If your price is 40, it's over here. Who gets the money? Well, it used to be Saudis, it used to be OPEC, it used to be these guys. That's completely over. I don't think that's ever going to come back. This is good. This is like the best news of the century in terms of economies. So none of us have to pay that tax ever again. It's probably the most important economic thing that I'll tell you all night. And it is so important. It's like, wow, it's not going to go back up to 148 tomorrow. It's never going to go back, in my opinion.
Why do you think that, Mark?
Pardon?
Why do you think that?
Can we do questions at the end? I'm happy to answer that question. But, okay, and then Russia. I'd like to do Russia a little bit. Last year I did China from the Chinese perspective, and I think that was helpful. I'd like to do Russia from the Russian perspective for a minute. And Richard, can you keep me honest in this? But it's helpful to look at the world from your opponents, or what do you want to say, from the other guy's view, right? I don't think we're doing that. Imagine that you were America and Russia put missiles in Cuba. We didn't like that very much. And in fact, we had put missiles in Turkey just before that. We tend to forget that part. And we changed. We both traded off. We'll take ours out of Turkey. You take yours. Remember this? This isn't so long ago. Okay. When the Soviet Union collapsed, what did we do? I don't know who it was. Richard probably knows these guys personally. But we, NATO, we, the West, decided that it was time to hammer down on the remainder of Russia and surround them with NATO countries. All the ex-Soviet Union, right up to their necks, we were going to turn them all into their enemies, military enemies, or friends if they want to join NATO too. We even talked to Russia about joining. Well, if you're Russia, what? What are you going to do? How do you feel about this? Can you imagine Russia coming over, turning Canada and Mexico into communist nations? Would we sit still? And then they want to turn them into missile bearing. Come on, really? So I think from their perspective, they have a legitimate problem. I'm not saying that they're right. I'm not saying that I'm on their side. I'm not. That's the opposite. Actually, it's just the opposite. But I think we need to actually see it from their perspective to better understand how to manage the globe. And what they're feeling is the pressure that we have intentionally put on them to kind of, if not wipe them out, at least push them right to the very edge. And when you play brinkmanship with somebody who's got a whole nuclear arsenal that can wipe out the globe, that could be stupid. So what we're seeing now are some stupid things happening that you could say Putin caused, but we caused it too. So we put him in a situation where he had to do something, I think, to preserve, he calls it his sovereignty. But I understand. So somehow we're going to have to solve this thing in a way which allows Putin to save face and be the hero and be the leader of his country and not look like we're swallowing every child that he's got. We've got to have it so that we can have NATO, we can coexist together, but we can't push him to the brink because you just don't want to do that with a country like Russia. They may not be the smartest guys in the world, they're quite smart, but they will definitely fight back. So I think that's a mistake. And I hope that we can kind of figure this out in a way which makes sense. I'll say it again, I'm not on Putin's side. I think he's a jerk. But I don't blame him for some of the things that he's done. All right, China. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on China, but I think it's important to say people don't understand how the Chinese national business model works. They do not actually have the full view of what China is. And so they look at different parts of it. They complain or they make money, but they don't actually look at the whole elephant. And without doing that, it's very difficult to have an opinion that's an educated opinion, or to have a policy that's a meaningful foreign policy. I believe that we're looking at a country which has deeper troubles than most people think. So if you said, what's the biggest question that most business financial people ask right now, it's like, how's China going to do? Because how's China going to do is going to drive the entire global story. China is not going to do well. And the reason I say this, two reasons. One is, I believe if you look inside that model, what you find are fraud and theft. I'm not trying to be mean about this. I really think this is true. So I think it's cultural. I think it's a problem. I think that if we talked with, if Xi were sitting here, we talked with him. He's trying to fight corruption. We're kind of all on the same page on this. But there you go. And so, when you have, like what's worse than if you describe the U.S., you might say the U.S. is a chaotic market, at best, right? What's worse than a chaotic market with no one in charge? A top-down market with 7 very, very smart guys in charge. That's worse. Because they can postpone Armageddon for a long, long time. There can be a buildup of all these problems for a long, if you're really smart, you can postpone tragedy for a very long time. And all these problems bubble up. You just keep putting the lid on them until finally you can't. But when that day comes, it's a bad day. And I think that that's the risk that China runs. They've been playing, whether it's pollution, whether it's fake banks, you can make a long list of things. Dead loans. How many dead loans are there in China? I think we have an idea, and it's going to be a number that's so much larger than what's published. So, when does the piper get paid? The piper will be paid, but when will the piper be paid? And will that be a gentle process, or will it be something abrupt? So instead of worrying about, are they going to make their 7.8 number this year, I'd like to propose a different question. Whether you come from Greece, or Italy, or US, whatever relationship you have with China, what if the number were 2 next year instead of 7.8? Or 3 or 5. I've never trusted the numbers that are coming out of that country, up and down. I think when they're telling us they're doing 10, they were doing 14. But I think right now they're telling us 7 point whatever, it's probably 5. Well, what if it were 2? What if they hit a wall based on systems collapse and they just can't stuff any more loans down that pipe into the garbage cans below? Or what if they can't suffer pollution anymore in Beijing? So all these things that have a kind of a hard ending to them, hard stop. What if? So I think it's, if we're responsible planners, the question is going to be, plan for that. What's plan C? Maybe it won't happen, but it probably will happen. With all the power they have to respond day to day, it actually makes it more likely that when it does come time for a response, for settling, it'll be worse instead of better. I think most people in the world think the opposite way. They think, oh, these guys having total control, they're just going to postpone things forever. They'll always support the banks. They'll always support the state-owned company. It's going to work out. I think it's the opposite way around. I think they've already done that. They've been doing that for 30 years. But then you finally hit this hard stop. And if that's true, and you depend upon that, then you have to figure out what your plan is. Japan, on the other hand, to me is the other way around. Japan, like China, like South Korea, like Taiwan, has a mercantilist policy. We call it infomercantilism. People spend all their time on averages. You can say, what's the average educational state in America? Well, there is no such thing. We have the most brilliant people in the world and the dumbest people in the world. So averages are really, really deceiving, I think. In Japan, the intention of the model, and they were the first guys who developed this model, the intention was not to have an average. Never intended to have an average. The intention of the mercantilist model is to favor exporters. If you said, how are they doing in Japan? It would be like, wow, they're the richest people in the world. They are minting money. And so I think we have to be a little more nuanced in how we look at business models and ask, what's the purpose of the national business model? Is it to create an average uplift? That's kind of the American thought. Or is it to create an uplift for exporters? And if it's B, okay, how's that going for you? Well, Japan is doing really, really well. And instead of thinking there's this moribund, recession-riddled, 20 or 30-year-old story of failure, Toyota makes 60% of its cars offshore. Are they a Japanese company? They are. Does the money from the sale of those cars go into the GDP? No, it doesn't. Oh, that's interesting. Where does the money show up? I'm not sure, So if you're Toyota US or Toyota U or Toyota, and we're working on a book on this, actually. Scott Foster is about to publish a book on this, so I benefited from reading Scott's work. But it's really interesting, and it's not what the world thinks. It's not what the global media thinks. And people should be saying, Japan is extremely successful. It's just that they're doing something different from what we're trying to do here. So Japan's, I think, in great shape. By the way, they own China. South Korea, kind of tough because, as I said, China's going after South Korea. So China is going to gut the South Korean enterprises just as South Korea did that to Japan in the prior cycle. It's not funny, but you could have a sense of humor about this because literally Japan took 5 industries out of the US, South Korea took them out of Japan, and now get ready to watch China do the same exact thing to South Korea. EU is kind of interesting to me. If you're watching I guess I'll call them the subtle parts of this, I'm starting to think of this as the GU. Right? The GU. It's not the EU, it's the GU. It's the German Union. And Angela Merkel is in charge, kind of like her. And when there's a question about something, Germany kind of states how it feels, and then it all rolls out. You almost never see anything happen in the EU if Germany doesn't want it to go that way. France, who cares, right? I mean, really, France, they're out of it. It used to be, Mitterrand holding hands with, that's over with. So now it's just Germany. It's not really Mr. Holland anymore or anybody else. So I really think that what we're seeing is call it the next chapter in the story of the EU. The intent, of course, was to avoid World War. Great. And we did. But the ultimate result is that Germany not only will economically dominate, but will politically dominate the whole EU. Are we good? Is that good? Okay. UK, good year ahead. Difficult balancing act. They're kind of half pregnant in the EU and half pregnant with China. They have to figure out who they're dating, but they'll figure it out somehow. In Australia, sorry, but despite our great friends from Telstra here, I think economically they're now kind of a captive of China. It's kind of a tough situation. So when China goes way up, Australia goes way up. But China right now is going down, and Australia is going down. This is not a secret. And it's really hard because they're so closely tied economically. It's a tough fight. I don't know how politically and economically does Australia get out of that grip. I don't know if they want to, but they're in it. So enough of that, and let's go to tech landscape. I want to share a passion that I have, and those of you who read SNS know about this already. We've defined a chip called pattern recognition processors. Every day that goes by, it seems like a better call. So those who've been coming to FIRE know we've been talking about pattern recognition since 1995. The day has come. We're there. We're here. It took a long time, and here we are. So after all that time, we've been talking about how the brain works and how chips should work. We now have our first chips that do this. The True North chip from IBM, I've written about it. Wow. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. Many more to come. But what matters is, in all this talk about big data, I have a friend who's on one of the committees in Washington, D.C. that did the big data National Science Foundation. He said, big data doesn't mean anything at all. We've had big data forever. Big data is just this word, We hit data. What is data? Data is big data. So it was kind of a joke to us who did the funding thing, but it was the thing that we could sell at the NSF. So we sold it, and they bought it, and they got funded. Now, what is real within all that is if you can do something with it, right? And what you can do with that is look for patterns. So the data isn't so important as it is what you do with it, and what you're going to do with it is find chips and computer systems that can actually look at patterns and give you something back. And you hear a lot about predictive analysis and that kind of stuff. Fine, but really what we're talking about is find the pattern, bring it back, tell me what it is, augment human behavior with this information. And that's going to be a complete revolution in computing. Not a small revolution, a gigantic revolution. It'll be different companies, different chips, different software, different tools, different languages, new programming codes, everything. And it's going to be so much more powerful than the old von Neumann Intel approach that there's no contest. It won't be like, which one should I use? As soon as they're ready commercially, they're going to win. It's a lot like what we're hearing about quantum computing, because that's kind of a similar story. But in this case, it's easier to do. So my guess will be that as quantum computing gets figured out over the next 10 years or so, this is going to happen faster. And we'll have not just IBM with their True North chip, we'll have a bunch of companies coming in with brand new chips. Samsung, by the way, made the chip for IBM. Biggest chip IBM ever made. And these chips, these PRPs or neuromorphic chips, will totally change how computers work. There are some, Elon Musk is worried about AI, and probably rightfully so. But my thought is not yet. I think we're still at the stage where if you want to unplug it, you unplug it. And what we really are finding is we're going to have systems which can help us be better at what we do. And really, the stuff we've got today is just rinky-dink. I mean, when you think about, I don't want to offend anybody, but the tools that we use today are pathetic. And it would be nice if we had tools which actually were kind of like us, could say, Michael, don't make that mistake. Oh, thank you, right? Just like you're driving, please don't turn left there. Thanks, I was thinking about something else. That's what we need, and that's exactly what we're going to get. And we need to have that as soon as possible, and I think this is a wonderful thing. So it's a huge, huge change. I kind of call this the fake economy. I'm worried about the fake economy of social networks, of social things. I'm worried that there isn't enough money. There isn't enough money to support these things which we think are worth these stock values. There isn't enough real customer money. There isn't enough ad money. You see everyone scrambling. Facebook last week wants to eat LinkedIn. LinkedIn wants to eat somebody else. They're all scrambling because there actually isn't enough money. So there's all this IPO money, but there isn't customer money. And I think that there's going to be a reckoning about this. I don't know what you want to call it. It's a shakeout. When I see teens fleeing Facebook, and I see how much hard they're scrambling to get more money from mobile and stuff, there's going to be a shakeout. It doesn't matter what your head count is. What matters is, did you make enough money today or not? Did you make a profit? How much? So I suspect that we're going to see a gigantic shift. Not going to go away, but we're going to see a gigantic shift in that landscape. IoT, very exciting, new sensors, I love them. New prices for sensors, new sizes, new networks, new connected car networks, which is really important. Whole new networks that are going to be made for seeing things back and forth, and home networks. My favorite thing in this whole list probably is bug badges. I call them bug badges. So Ebola. Yesterday or 2 days ago, it was announced one team in France and one team in Germany, I think, found a way to do Ebola testing in 15 minutes. Okay, that's good. Imagine if we, in looking at healthcare, if we could have a badge for, Paul could have a badge, I have a badge, put a badge on the door, badge on the men's room, badge in the baseball park, and if you want to know, is this virus here? Yes, it is, or no, it's not. Well, that would be helpful. Be very helpful. And if you want to know, do I have it? You go to a GP or just get your watch out or put it on, and you'd find out, yeah, you got it, or no, you don't have it. The most important thing in the whole Ebola story is the speed of response. If you get that down from 5 days or 2 labs or whatever it is, FedEx to like 5 minutes. Wow, no more Ebola. We're done. So this is really important. I think this shows a new step toward what I call infectious disease badging. Whether we badge ourselves or our spaces, it will really change our ability to control disease. By the way, when we do this, you're not going to ever want to go to a hospital again. 3D printing. Everyone knows I'm hot on this, so I'll just say it one more time. Graphene 3D printing. 3D printing is cool, but it goes from being cool to being a change in how the world manufactures things when you use graphene. If you're just going to use polymers, or if you're just going to use some metals or 3 metals, or some polymer and 2 metals, you're never going to get out of the rut. You're always going to be making single things in a single, it's just very boring and not very powerful. But if you want to change global manufacturing, you're going to use a material which could make everything in this room from one material, and that fits the requirements and constraints of printers. They only have a few print heads, and so you have to use something which is omnipowerful that way, omni characteristic. So something like graphene, which has characteristics in conductivity, characteristics in thermal, characteristics in strength, perfect. If you put nanoflakes of that into a 3D printer, you have just changed how the world will make everything. And I'm sure it's going to happen. It's not going to happen next year, but we're going to see more and more companies working on this. And if you're interested in this part of the field, watch it happen. We know of, I guess, 4 or 5 companies now doing this, trying to do this. And it won't be too long before somebody pops it, gets it right, and shows up and says, I can print you an entire car, chips, wires, and all, without stop. One row, one time. Healthcare, clearly we're going to see a change in the power equation as we go along. So to me, it's really political. It's like we've gone for a long time where doctors have all the power, patients have no power, doctors have all the information, patients have no information. And this revolution with wearables is changing that. So we'll see, and I'll talk about that again. We'll see a real readjustment in how you work with your doctor and who's got the power and how you stay healthy. Quick report on last year versus this year. So last year we were at 94.4% accurate overall, and then in 2014 it looks like, and we're not done yet, it looks like 97%, but what it depends upon is 2 calls that I made about pricing for pads and for phones. We won't, for the year, we won't know until year end. We'll see the reports from Q4 in the year and we'll see what happens. But I think I'm close. Maybe I won't get it, maybe I will. So it looks right now like 94.7. I'm never gonna get out of the 94 camp again unless I go down. So that's where I live, and that's where I still seem to be. And that brings us to the predictions. So as you know, I don't vamp on these. I read them carefully because I have to live by them a year from now. So I'm going to read them to you very carefully, and then we'll do a conversation. Top 10 calls for 2015. Number 1, digital currencies multiply and then go nowhere. When will geeks learn that currencies are more than hard math problems and require the good faith, economic strength, and military power of a nation in order to warrant the trust of others? Not next year. Number 2, net neutrality survives the onslaught of US lobbyists, but carriers are thrown a slim bone of some kind by old friend Tom Wheeler. Number 3, pattern recognition becomes the real goal of predictive analytics and big data collection, and PRP chips, pattern recognition, and a whole new ecology of tools and languages begin to arrive in developers' hands, setting the stage for a revolution in computing. Number 4, security takes its rightful place in the CEO agenda, and corporate spending on security reverses its current downward trend. The cost of building an insecure internet is paying for security, and this is the year when all the tickets come due at once. Number 5, VR remains exactly that, virtual, everywhere except in gaming and fringe entertainment. Just because Zuck has a good lunch date with Oculus doesn't mean the rest of the world has not already taken a pass on this technology for decades. Number 6, Amazon stumbles as Jeff's appetite finally exceeds his reach and customers are turned off by his megalomaniacal drive. The Fire Phone debacle, off-book rocket adventures, hapless drone delivery scenarios, hachette punishments, all lead to a loss of customer and investor confidence. Number 7, home networks finally get off the launch pad, and it turns out that all people want is low energy bills, TVs everywhere, and a single remote. Pretty straightforward. What they don't want, talking refrigerators, things that don't work, complexity replacing reliability, more nested menus instead of real buttons, dumb things talking to dumb thing, other dumb things, or worst of all, hackable home networks. Samsung and Apple lead the pack in this race. Number 8, Apple Pay succeeds, establishing its leadership in the new malt category. With mapping improved and micro-mapping driven by beacons, advertising dollars following beacon merchandising edge, location provided by phones and beacons, and the final transaction step now well in hand with Apple Pay, Apple achieves the technical and market steps necessary for domination of retail and physical space services. Number 9, encryption continues its exponential expansion everywhere, deeper, and end-to-end. For our certain safe friends here, this one's for you. A continuing major trend. Thank you again, Edward, for protecting us from China and Russia, as well as from ourselves. And number 10, personal health, fitness, and lifestyle devices merge. The doctor-patient relationship begins an inevitable and irreversible shift in power and cooperation. We'll see a new flood of watches, bands, and jewelry, but intelligent clothing stays fashion niched because of price and inconsistency. New goals for the device genre, non-invasive measurement of blood pressure and glucose levels. That's a real moneymaker. And for the fanciful, creative visual displays of body state, such as heart rate and galvanic skin response. Perhaps even a lover's proxy touch. New creative energies in science and design rush in. So that's it. Those are the 10, and I hope they all come true.